conversations that, you think about for months, years after?
A great moment of the college. There are so many great moments. Every student I meet.
But every time I go back, I know I'm going to meet a familiar face, whether it's...
That really shaped the rest of my existence in every possible way.
So I'm Chryssi Giannitsarou. I'm an economist, and at King's I have two roles. The primary one is financial tutor, and I'm also director of studies for economics. So I've been in Cambridge actually for 14 years now, a bit more maybe. I joined King's in 2012. So before coming to King's, I spent a good amount of time at the Faculty of Economics as an economist there without a college. In the first few years, I was at Churchill College, and then eventually moved here because I had a lot of good colleagues that were fellows here in economics, and I thought it was an interesting place to join. Before coming to Cambridge, I worked as an economist in Lisbon for a couple of years, an academic economist, and then going backwards, I did my studies in graduate studies in London, and I came to London from Athens where I studied mathematics actually, and this is where I grew up. I'm what I call an accidental economist, a little bit. I did my undergraduate studies in mathematics. I liked mathematics a lot, but at the end of my studies at the time, I felt that it was a little bit too abstract and, heavy for doing anything, meaningful in life, apart from just enjoying doing mathematics, right? So I was looking for different things one can do, and talking to friends at the time that were looking for graduate studies, said, look, you can be a great economist because you can be a mathematical economist, you can put this into place. So I arrived to London to do a degree in mathematical economics. And incredibly, I discovered that I loved it because it was putting into life things that had no life, right? Letters and numbers, and then suddenly, I could explain this completely complicated, chaotic thing that we have around us with equations, and that was very attractive. And I guess the reason why I ended up doing macroeconomics eventually was precisely that I really enjoyed the idea that you have a very big, complicated system of interactions of micro people and individuals all the way up to the top. And we can describe it and explain it very easily and nicely with mathematical equations, and we can do a lot of good things with it. So not planning to become an economist, from when I was a little kid, but found out that it's a very interesting thing to do, very important thing. There's a little bit of misconception about economists. Everybody thinks that economists are oracles, right? And they can tell the future, and they know that, in 10 years from now, interest rates will be 4% and the economy will be growing. We don't know these things, right? The weather forecasters, at best, they can tell you maybe it's going to be raining tomorrow, but they cannot tell you that a hurricane is coming, right? So economists are a little bit like that. So we have models and ideas of how, on average, things would be. So when we do forecasting, it's based around this idea that I can give you an informed view of where the economy will be in 10 years, but I cannot know with certainty, right? So not knowing that there was a recession, there was a financial crisis, doesn't mean that the economists are not doing their job well. I mean, what most people perceive as economics is what they hear about in the business news, on TV, about the recession, the economic activity. This is more macroeconomics. But I would say that if you think about it carefully, economics is everywhere. Even in interactions between two students in the canteen that they're thinking about what food to get. If you get this, I'll share this with you, and they're optimizing their minds. This is economic interactions, it's economic decision making. We don't think about it as necessarily economics. So understanding economics and being good economists means that a lot of everyday planning and activity happens in a good way, right? So in recent times, for example, one of a nice thing that economists can have something to say about is financial literacy. So it's something that after post-financial crisis is considered a very important aspect of education. Because we do understand now that a lot of things might have gone the wrong or the right way during the financial crisis because of people's misinformation, misperceptions, all sorts of aspects like this. So we have to think about economics broadly. It's not a very narrow thing that just, you think of the policymaker, the central banker, and the politicians, and that's that. It's a lot more. It's a bit of a personal thing, it's a preference, right? I find it very fun, actually, very interesting to see how one can build systems and think about worlds with many small individuals and how everything gets together and gets organized and things work out somehow. So doing macroeconomics is very much about that. And my own research is a little bit at the border of macroeconomics, I would say. I'm interested in the interplay between the macroeconomy and financial markets. So a lot of my work has to do with financial markets and how they're affected by aggregate economic activity, the feedback of financial markets back to the macroeconomic activity. But the way I approach my own research is not traditional in the sense that I'm very interested in individual financial behavior and how that aggregates up into macroeconomic phenomena. They're all interesting and fun to do, but I have to confess that I enjoy a lot teaching the first-year students. I've been doing it since 2004, and it's very rewarding because they come in completely clean slate, very excited and very interested about learning macroeconomics. So it's nice to see the eagerness in their eyes and their curiosity and get them to get introduced to the new concepts and get them excited about the topic. Later on it becomes different. It's much more technical, more involved, but definitely enjoy the undergraduate teaching a lot. It's very easy to teach without a worldview and without being, let's say, subjective, right? All one needs to do is to say, we make assumptions, there are outcomes, right? So if we make assumptions, the worldview is encapsulated in the assumptions. So I can provide the assumptions and give the outcomes, right? Design the models, give the outcomes. And then I can spend time questioning and judging the assumptions and arguing about the assumptions. I can do all of this, but that would be the philosopher that does it. So I can easily offer all the schools of thought and say, if you do this assumption, this is the outcome you get this view. If you make a different assumption, you get a completely different outcome. And I try to do that. Of course, I have my own opinions about what is good and what is right and what is not right, what is reasonable or not. But I try to teach the students that we need to make the assumptions, use the assumptions to make conclusions, but at the end we have to judge whether the assumptions are right or not. Macroeconomics at King's. There's many famous macroeconomists that have been here. Perhaps the most famous one is John Maynard Keynes. That is a household name. Everybody knows about Keynes. We're sitting in his quarters. He used to spend a lot of time in here. But he's not the only one. There have been many amazing macroeconomists, Pigou, Stone, Kaldor. There is one that is a little bit overlooked because he was not considered a macroeconomist, although he has done great contributions in macroeconomics, is Frank Ramsey. He's one of my favorite ones. He was a mathematician by training, but he worked very closely with macroeconomists at King's College at the time, developed very important macroeconomic theories on economic growth. He was contemporary with Keynes, in fact. I should mention perhaps Joan Robinson, who is one of the few women that have been around doing economics at Cambridge and at King's. She was a bit of a controversial figure, but a very interesting person. And of course, I'm not mentioning any of the microeconomists. I'm thinking about macroeconomics here only. But yeah, so there's a lot of history, there's a lot of tradition. And I guess there's nothing, strictly speaking, saying that because of all these people who have been here, there's something different about doing macroeconomics at King's. But it's very nice for the students to come in here and walk in here and feel the history of the space and know that interesting things happened here in the past. And maybe in their minds, they think that, you know, in 20 years from now, in 30 years from now, somebody will be saying, oh, remember in the 2018, there was interesting things happening in this room, interesting supervisions and developments of new theories. So the financial tutor is a member of the tutorial group. The tutorial group is quite large. It consists of a number of people that do different things. The standard tutor is the side tutor that looks after students closely, is more pastoral. But the tutorial group needs also somebody to check welfare, to check that people are studying, the study skills tutor, and then they need somebody to look over their finances, right? To make sure that they're not in debt, that they're paying their bills, that their finances are sound. So that's my job, really. It's not a job where I'm actually checking what students are spending and how they're spending, but I'm there to check that they're fulfilling their financial guarantees, for example, that they're paying their bills on time. The most important part of the job is when things go wrong for students financially. And this is where I come in with the help of their tutor. So usually they talk to their tutor, the tutor gets a sense of where the problems are, and then they come to me and we discuss what we can do to help them. Because the college's view is that students should not be held back from their studies because of financial reasons. It's very, very important. And I tell the students every year, I mean, at the start of the year, we tell them, if things go wrong financially for you, do not worry. You should keep doing your studies and we will find ways to help you out. So from my perspective, it's very important that we check that students are in good financial state. And the ways to do this is to allocate hardship funds, to give them different ways to cover expenses that otherwise they might have not thought about, but also help students that come from underprivileged backgrounds with things that normally they would not have the opportunity to do. For example, doing a language course or traveling somewhere or doing an internship. There are some tedious things that I'm doing every year, like checking the financial guarantees or sitting down and thinking about bursary allocations a bit kind of in a mechanic way. But the interesting part of the job is to actually help students that are in difficulty, usually. The hardship funds are usually reserved for emergency situations. If there is something unusual that happened to somebody's family, an accident, sometimes there are, families breaking up, all sorts of reasons why a student might be in a situation that they cannot cover their finances. And then what we do is that we try to go through their situation in a more personal level and see what is best for them, what we can offer to help them out. And these grants are for them, right? Sometimes we offer loans as well in situations that we think that students will be maybe able to repay in the future. But there are some standardized ways of helping generally students through there's the Cambridge bursary that is independent of King's College, but it offers financial help to students from families with low income. And then we have a lot of little pockets of things that we can offer. So there's the travel grants, which is a fantastic way for students to go and travel and see the world, as long as there's some educational purpose to it. We have the grants that are offered for cultural activities. We have the Islands Fund that is an amazing source of way of funding anything cultural as long as it benefits the community of King's College. Then we offer help for sports, for languages. We even offer help for medical expenses. In cases like this, we're very happy to offer help, and it's very important that the students can actually get on with things and go and do their exams and do well. The Cambridge Bursary is organized centrally by the Cambridge University and is essentially financial help for students that come from families with a pre-specified low income up to £42,620. It's a very precise number. And there's a kind of a way of allocating funds. The max they can get is £3,500 a year. And it's essentially a present from the university to the students, which is great. And well, students apply for it, they get it, but from my perspective, what I find a bit not so attractive about the Cambridge Bursary is that it's really, it follows the number. So that's why I mention it so precisely, because if anybody's at the 43,000 instead of the 42,620, they're not eligible for that. And there's a lot of students that might fall in that category, actually, that are just above and not qualify and missing out on this potential help. The problem is that if you want to do something in large scale, there have to be some rules, right? So effectively, the Cambridge Bursary works well in that sense because there's a very precise rule, and then you follow it, and then you're looking at a big range of students and you allocate funds accordingly. But I'm thinking, from my perspective as a financial tutor, what I like being able to do here is that when I have the student that doesn't really fall into this category of fitting the number, I can go into the personal situation and look at the specific case, understand why this person is in financial need. Sometimes it may not be the family income. It could be that the student comes from a family that's just separated, and one of the parents says, "I'm not paying anything," right? Or they might have a difficult situation at home for whatever reason. But this you cannot do with just rules and numbers. You have to have somebody personally going into the case. And then it's great if we have extra funds to support these students that don't fit into the box, the category of the Cambridge Bursary. Quite different, in fact, because the graduate students stay here a lot longer. If they do PhDs, in fact, they can stay here 4 or 5 years, sometimes even longer, depending on their topic. And they have different financial needs. And in fact, what we're trying to do when we think about funding for them is to fit their needs, right? Because graduate students need funding for conferences, they need funding for traveling, for equipment, for their research, computers. Usually the undergraduates don't have this kind of needs. So we offer, in some kind of automated way, we offer grants along these lines to graduate students, but we're also generous in offering other help if needed. For example, for me, I guess I should say it's very important to help mothers. For example, there are graduate students that are mothers, and they need the daycare support, which is something that is very expensive in this country, actually, to pay daycare. So that's something to take into consideration. We help graduate students with their expenses at the end of graduation, submitting their thesis, binding. All of these things are little amounts of money here and there that makes a difference for them. But perhaps the most important thing to mention about graduate funding, which is bigger, more important than just King's College, I guess, and is a UK-wide problem, is that we do not offer good funding for our graduate students here. And as a consequence, we tend to lose a lot of brilliant scholars to US institutions where they get full funding, because we cannot offer them the kind of funding that they can get there. But as far as we can do as King's College here, what we try to do is, when we secure our graduate students that they come, we try to help them as much as possible so that this gap is not so big. So that we give them incentives at least to think about the possibility of staying here instead of going somewhere else where they can get more funding. So one important difference is the timing of things. So decisions in the UK are taken late in the year, while offers for graduate studies for studies in the US, for example, or Canada, are given early. So already that's a problem. And usually what happens is that the universities in the US offer full funding for graduate students. It's very rare that anybody goes to do graduate studies without funding because it's so expensive that it doesn't make sense for anybody to take up 5 years of PhD studies without full funding. So from the perspective of a candidate, if in January he's sitting on an offer with, let's say, $60,000 a year guaranteed income, and then comparing to an offer from the UK, we'll say, okay, we pay your fees and maybe a little bit of pocket money during the year, and the offer might come in April. It's a very easy decision to make, right? It's very easy to head to US or to Canada. So it would be very useful if we could actually try to make this gap smaller. There's no way ever to compete with the numbers that the top US universities would offer as funding. But at least we could be able to say, look, we offer fees, full maintenance cover, additional funding for scholarship, for example, for encouraging specific research that is expensive because there are different types of research. Economics is not an expensive topic to study, but if you work in a lab and if you have to do research in a lab, it's actually, funding is very, very important. So a different level of funding for the graduate students than the undergraduates. Yeah. What we're thinking about in this research is whether the way societies are structured in terms of how people interact with each other has an effect on long-run outcomes for these economies. So our idea was very simple to say, suppose that everything is identical in the economy. Everything that we don't want to look at differences that have to do with, let's say, policy or initial conditions of things that are common for everybody, like physical capital, resources, these kind of things. So suppose that everybody starts from the same kind of world. If we only changed how societies are structured, what happens? What differences could we see or not see? And what we found in a bit of an unsurprising way, I guess, is that if there are certain social structures that enable inequality to be reduced in the long run and to get to paths where everybody grows similarly, and the opposite. And the differences in the social structure have to do with what I call network cohesion. This is the critical term. Now, it's a bit of a technical term when it comes to our research, so you can pin it down to specific numbers, but if I want to describe the notion of what it means, it says that if you have societies where there are individual groups that interact a lot between them, but they don't communicate very much among the different groups, then you may end up in situations that the groups grow separately and you have inequality. While if you have structures where, although you might have these particular groups, there is communication among them and you let them interact and gain from each other, then equality prevails eventually. Again, it's kind of a technical term that we use in economics to describe what is inside us, the abilities that we have inside our body, right? It's not factories and machines, it's that what do I have in my brain? I have something that works very well, that's my human capital, right? And that depends on how we interact with others. If I'm on my own on an island, I can have my brain and I can have my thoughts, but it's probably not as good as if I had another group of 10 people and we talked to each other and we swapped ideas and we progressed and grew together. So that's where the human capital comes in. So when I think about interactions and social structures, I'm thinking about this exchange of ideas, essentially, and the building of human capital. One of the amazing things about being in Cambridge is that you have you have the ability to interact with all sorts of different people, different disciplines, different backgrounds. In a typical life of an academic economist, that they would be in an economics department in a University X, they have lunch with other economists, they talk to economists only, they don't do anything else, and they just bounce ideas back and forth. So this would be the story of the groups that talk to themselves only. They might be doing fine, but I think overall, being in a place like Cambridge, where you can actually sit down at lunch and talk to the historian, or talk to the philosopher, or talk to I have a very lovely colleague that is specialized on Shakespeare, for example, and we suddenly talk about that. You know, this is priceless, because I can go home and think about a completely different aspect of how a non-economist thinks about an economic problem, right? So this is how we build the human capital.